Attachment, a term many Force sensitives treat as a four-letter word. It seems that if one is born with the ability to touch the Force, they are doomed to a life without romance and without deep connection. The Jedi treat it as a straight slip and slide to the dark side, and have set up harsh rules against it. But for the natural tendency for any being to seek out a life partner, oftentimes that rule has caused more harm than it has prevented. But what of the Sith? They preach freedom from the shackles placed by the Jedi, and yet they seem to look down on attachment as well, seeing it as weakness. But is this truly the only stance they had on love? Historically speaking, that is incorrect. In reality, the Sith Order's view on love was incredibly diverse, and every era had different opinions. Sometimes those ideals competed within the same era, in fact. So greetings again, lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. In today's video, we're going to explore the truth about the Sith's differing ideologies regarding attachment. But first, we encourage you to form an attachment of your own. Subscribe to the channel so that you may unlock more light and dark side lore. The archives are ever at your service, my friend. But now, let us begin. The best place to begin with any Sith philosophy is at the inception of their order. This means traveling all the way back to the year 6900 BBY, analyzing the original 12 Dark Jedi Exiles, or, as they were known of at the time, the Gen Jedi. Their leader Ajunta Pall and his followers departed the Jedi Order during the time when Jedi families were still widely accepted. In fact, before, in the year 3996 BBY, it was very normal for Jedi to have their own families and lives separate from the Jedi Order. They were just expected to answer the call anytime they were needed, and to depart from their families for however long was required. It was not customary for all of the Jedi to live in one communal space. Many Jedi never even stepped foot on their capital of Ossus during this time. And so, since attachment was not something limited by the Jedi, it was not something given much attention by the Exiles either. Ajunta Pall and his followers, particularly one of our favorites, Sorzus Syn, who wrote most of the Sith Code, formulated their doctrine to be a direct rejection of the Jedi way. And so, if limitations placed on love was a rule, then they would have addressed it. But they do not. In fact, they actually treated relationships very normally. Sorzus Syn records in her journal that one of their number, Remulus Drapa, fell in love with one of the Sith pure-blooded priestesses. Having been a Baron, he was obsessed with ensuring that his family line continued, but was concerned about being physiologically incompatible with the Sith race. However, Sorzus, through her alchemy, found a way to make humans and the purebloods compatible. It is a historical fact that the Gen Jedi married and inbred with the Sith, but we can assume that Remulus succeeded in having a family with the priestess that he was leering after. Though it's of course difficult to tell exactly how much of it was real or just lust and a desire to carry on his bloodline, not so much out of love. But let's move into the future. Marka Ragnos is noted as being of the bloodline directly connected to the Jedi Exiles. Some sources suggest that he was the direct descendant of their leader Ajunta Pall. We have records that indicate that Ajunta may have married one of the other Exiles. Sorzus Syn never wrote about a relationship with Ajunta, and in fact wanted to actively overthrow him. The only other two female exiles that we know of are Zozan and Boudica. Either way, the details are entirely important. What is important is that the foundations of the Sith Order saw absolutely no issue with relationships or families. It wasn't even something that they mentioned in any of their ideologies or writings. It was both a fact of life and a survival tactic. Their examples would live on in the Old Sith Empire. For thousands of years, all throughout the Golden Age of the Sith, marriage for any reason was perfectly acceptable. What's fascinating is in the lore, they also appear to have taken monogamy quite seriously. Tenebrae, or Vitiate as he would later be known, was the product of an affair between Lord Dromuth and a farmer's wife. When Tenebrae was a toddler, the farmer found out and began beating the woman. Tenebrae then killed him with the Force, but proceeded to torture his mother to death as punishment for her unfaithfulness. Unsurprisingly, the Sith purebloods were a passionate people, since passion has everything to do with communing with the dark side. So the Sith took their attachments and relationships extremely seriously. At least they did in this era. Following the Great Hyperspace War, the Sith ceased to be a people group and became more of a religion and an order. And when this happened, their ideas on love began to slowly transform and shift. It wasn't a change that was decided at any official point in time, but rather an evolution born from their studies of the dark side. As they prioritized power from their religious practices, they began to see families as less and less necessary. Beings of many other races were joining the Sith Order by choice now, so the requirement to breed more Sith became obsolete, and attachment became something else entirely. From this point, we've narrowed down 3 schools of thought that the Sith typically look at. The first was marriage for mutual benefit. This was the joining of 2 Sith done for personal gain without any attachment whatsoever. This could be the result of an arranged marriage between 2 families, or 2 Sith that believed they could increase their social status by joining. This practice was heavily implemented within Vitiate's empire, as well as in the Lost Tribe of the Sith. Both societies were very elitist by nature. It was the primary goal of every citizen to climb the social ladder by any means necessary. More status meant more privileges and more freedom. While the typical way to climb the strict system was cunning and backstabbing your superiors, marriages were another good way of climbing as well. If 2 were able to produce an offspring of significant power, they could manipulate their child through the ranks of the Sith Lords, ultimately gaining their family's prestige in the process. Though this wasn't the case for the Lost Tribe of the Sith, they were an elitist society, but one with a touch of meritocracy as well. The High Lords and High Ladies, as they were called, did marry for status, but their children had to make names for themselves. The daughter of the ruling Dark Lord, for instance, had to serve time as a Sith Saber, climb her way up the royalty despite being a princess by birth. When looking at the Lost Tribe, Spiral Comics, we can infer several things by watching a Sith husband and their wife interact. The 2 of them consult each other like business partners do. They plot and scheme together to gain power as a unit. A lot of times, the 2 are really just using the other for their own means. But because they both know and accept this, there is no pretense about their relationship. With that being the case, real love is rarely involved in any of the Sith empires. But let's talk about the second ideology, the one which is the most popular association with the Sith, and that is that love is a weakness. This is the one championed by most Dark Lords throughout history, and the one that seeped deep into the Rule of 2 and their philosophy. As their studies in the dark side grew, the Sith championed anger, hatred, and pain as the core from which to draw their power. Anything that filled one with positive emotions was to be rejected. The Sith did not feel joy, only pleasure at seeing their plans come to fruition, or schadenfreude at the suffering of their enemies. They did not feel passion in a hopeful sense, only ambition to rise to greater heights. Anything that did not actively attribute to gaining power was seen as useless. Something that hindered growth was meant with disdain. While it was extremely rare, love sometimes brought the Sith to the light side as well. Revan's shared love for Bastila Shan was able to redeem her after she had been tortured by Darth Malak. And the Lord of Pain, Darth Talon, ended up crushing on one of the greatest enemies of the entire era, Meetra Surik. During their final confrontation, Meetra continued to strike him down again and again. But because of his strange powers in the dark side, Sion kept stitching his body back together and rising. Realizing that she could never overcome him, Meetra used his love for her to get him to see reason. She convinced him to let go of his pain, become one with the Force, and it actually worked. Many Sith take measures to either bury these stories or to discredit the Sith that succumbed to them. Obviously, they didn't want any evidence that the light had the ability to turn those from the path of the dark side and down the path of power. And this is why the Sith began to view love as dangerous, in a very different way than the Jedi did, but also shockingly similar as well. For many of them, this is why love and attachment was deemed as a worthless pursuit. It wasn't uncommon for a Sith to indulge their carnal passions for purely physical reasons, but it was entirely loveless. Some would even use relationships in malicious ways against others. A lord by the name of Cordis would often collect very expensive items, tapestries, and clothes, living a lavish lifestyle in full view of others. He once said that he derives power in the dark side from the covetous and envious eyes of his enemies, as well as his friends. In the same way, it would not be unheard of for a Sith to get with another person for no reason other than to draw power from the jealousy that resulted from it. But these same Sith will look down on any other from their order for having a real meaningful relationship. The real issue with being a Sith in love is not just that love can hinder the dark side's growth, but that it can also be used against you. If a Dark Lord was aware that their rival had an attachment, it would be very easy for them to take that person captive and control their rival, or to kill their love just to hurt them. But even if those things did not happen, many Sith who had relationships were openly admitting that they had a soft side, and that kind of public weakness was not tolerated in their society. A prime example of this was Darth Malgus and his lover, Alina Daru. His situation is extremely complex, as he was one of the most powerful and elite Sith Lords of Vitiate's empire. He already had a distaste for political games with his colleagues, as he felt it would ultimately weaken the Sith cause, but he had many enemies because of his strength. It didn't help that he had once been a slave, but through sheer power alone, rose through the ranks. He had a slave of his own, a Twi'lek by the name of Alina Daru. There was an extreme societal prejudice against non-humans in Vitiate's empire. Almost all of them were slaves. But Malgus did not share this racism, and fell in love with Alina. She believed that there was actually good within him, and committed herself to a secret relationship. Malgus treated her lovely as a wife, showing her a passionate and a softer side of himself that didn't exist anywhere else. In fact, she was the only person who knew his real name, and had the privilege of calling him Verdun, only in private. During the attack on the Jedi Temple, Alina was injured by Venzalo when he deflected her blaster shots directly back at her. Malgus, seeing her take hits, entered a rage that gave him the power to defeat the legendary Jedi. Malgus's rival, Darth Angral, would end up discovering this secret relationship following the Battle of Coruscant. Alina, who was delirious after being injured, accidentally called Malgus Verdun in the presence of other Sith. They also saw him treating her gently, allowing her to lean on him until she got medical attention. After this, Darth Angral accused Malgus of being weak, and made the mistake of calling his lover a mongrel. Malgus proceeded to beat Angral into a bloody pulp during a private duel. Despite technically being his superior, Darth Angral was completely unable to fight back at all. He was humiliated in the duel several times over, until Malgus called him a mongrel himself, stating that he has mongrelized the Empire. Only then did Darth Malgus end his life. Unfortunately, Alina was used against her lover once more. A Jedi by the name of Aren Linier ended up taking Alina hostage, forcing Malgus to bargain with her. Malgus promised that he would allow her to escape if she released Alina to him, and he kept true to his word as she departed. But after this, Malgus realized that as much as he loved her, she had become a true weakness to him, and so he killed her with his own hands. He would later write about Alina in his journals, which would later be read by Darth Vader years into the future. By then, Vader had taken the stance that love was weakness, since his grief for Padme had only hindered him. However, Vader attempted to find everything out that he could about Malgus's lover, but the Sith Lord had left her fate unwritten. The third and the final school of thought that we have narrowed this down to was that passion grants power. The subject of this ideology is that love is a useful tool to the dark side and to the Sith. These are the Sith that place no restrictions on themselves whatsoever when it comes to passion. Malgus was originally of this camp as well, until he was proven otherwise. But this sect believed that attachment is not only allowed, but useful in growing the dark side. The raw passions that come with attachment feed their energy, their jealousy. The worry and longing for their partner gives them drive. Such cases would be with Darth Bane and Githany. While Bane was in the Korriban Academy, he developed feelings for a Jedi turned Sith by the name of Githany. During the time when he was seen as a disgrace by the wider Academy, Githany still schemed with him to help him rise back to prominence. When he was barred from attending classes, she tutored him in private. Eventually the two developed feelings, and Bane allowed those raw passions to fuel his rise to power. However, Githany often used Bane's advances to her advantage as well. She once successfully poisoned him with a venom-coated kiss, and often attempted to manipulate him into doing her will. Bane saw through all of this though, but strangely found it charming. He was attracted to her guile, even though it was a threat to him. However, Bane did solidly believe that allowing love to become a weakness was not to be tolerated, and he would teach the same to his apprentice Zana. Bane mentored her from an early age not to grow attached to things. While she was undercover on one world, Zana was manipulating a group of freedom fighters who would ultimately serve the will of the Sith. Zana became attracted to their leader, Caladan, purely because of his fire and his ambition. Ultimately, she betrayed them to their deaths, but she was sad about his death, but accepted that he was temporary and that the Sith were eternal. But now we move deeper into the future. Darth Talon in particular used passion to fuel not only her power in the dark side, but used it to actively turn others as well. Talon existed in the Legacy era, 100 years after the time of Luke Skywalker. She seduced his ascendant Cade Skywalker to the dark side by convincing him that no one understood passion better than the Sith. The two ended up sleeping together, but she only did so to serve her master Crate, who wanted Cade to join them. In this case, Talon used the most lustful aspects of attachment to her advantage, thereby completing the school of thought that love was a tool to the Sith. The final example we have for you today is complex and somehow meets all three criteria of this list: Emperor Valkorion and Senya Tyrell. Vitiate, whom we mentioned earlier, was an immortal Sith Lord who had the power to move his essence from one vessel to the next. Any vessel he inhabited was called the voice of the Emperor, but at one point, he became dissatisfied with the ideologies of the Sith, and so he went on to build a completely separate empire in secret. This was the founding of the Eternal Empire on Zakuul. He would split his consciousness, placing it within a man by the name of Valkorian. Then, flexing his ultimate power in the Force, he became a religious figure on Zakuul and built the Eternal Empire. Vitiate's essence in the Valkorian body sort of operated on autopilot, performing his will to run the Empire. But during that time, Valkorian would meet a woman by the name of Senya, who was the captain of his honor guard. She was a feisty woman who had no problem speaking her mind during their war meetings, even if that meant speaking out against the Emperor himself. Valkorian became intrigued by her fiery nature and began a relationship with her. In the words of Senya, "What we had was not a child's notion of romance, but we were happy." From their union came several offspring: the twin princes Arkan and Thexan, and their youngest daughter, the Princess Valen. But following the birth of the twins is when Senya recalled her husband changed. He became cold and distant. Unbeknownst to her, Vitiate's main body back in the Sith Empire had been destroyed, and his spirit had fully rejoined with the Valkorian vessel. No longer was his consciousness split and operating on autopilot. The full evil of the Sith Emperor was now present in the Eternal Empire. In this way, he completed all three ideologies of Sith attachment. He initially married Senya out of a form of attraction, had children for his benefit so that he could have powerful offspring to control for the war, and ultimately, he pulled back from all of them, refusing to have any sort of weakness towards his family. In fact, he used all of his children, denying any sort of affection so that they would do anything to gain his favor and approval. It destroyed Senya to see what her family had become, and she ended up working against her husband to bring him down. But anyway, my friends, this was our full breakdown on the Sith philosophy regarding love and attachment. In your opinion, which camp do you believe would be the true Sith way? The approach that would truly yield the finest connection to the dark side? And also, do you believe these various ideologies were any better than the outright denial of the Jedi Order? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, may the Force be with you and have an amazing day.